A word of warning. This video will have spoilers for Baldur's Gate 3. You shouldn't care about spoilers. Spoiler culture is silly. But don't say I didn't warn ya. Also, sorry that my footage is capped at 30 FPS and still not perfect looking. My rig is a little long in the tooth, you know how it is. The video before last, we talked about Void Stranger, one of the two best games of 2023. This one's about Baldur's Gate 3, the other best video game of 2023. Hey, look at that! Both of the two best games of 2023 were games with really long development cycles, where the developers actually got time to cook. So was 2022's Game of the Year. Imagine that. I was actually a little bit late to the party on this one, and didn't get to it till January of 2024. However, I was extremely glad I did. First of all, I've been playing TTRPGs for like 9 years at this point, and my first was 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, so I was absolutely dunking large numbers of basketballs on all of this game's encounters, and also because it's just a really excellent game. Anyway, it's about to be hot Githyanki autumn. Pour yourself a nice hot beverage and break out your fall clothes, istic. I'm Juliet Necro, a goth trans dork who makes video essays for other goth trans dorks. You must have cast find traps in order to find this video. In truth, I wasn't really dunking those basketballs myself, so much as I was alley-ooping them for Lae'zel to dunk. Come to think of it, she'd be really good at playing basketball since she has access to jump as a Gith. Focus, Juliet, focus. I absolutely devoured Baldur's Gate 3, pouring hours and hours into it during my first playthrough. A huge reason I enjoyed that first playthrough so much was because of the undying thirst, and later genuine affection, that I had for Lae'zel of Kalir. Frankly, I don't think that the main quest of Baldur's Gate 3 is particularly interesting. Ontologically evil death cults are kind of par for the course in fantasy storytelling. However, I found the characters to be what kept me coming back, and definitely not the player character Tav. One of the features of Western RPGs is that they generally give the player more choices in how the story progresses than a JRPG, for comparison's sake. This means that Western RPG protagonists are sometimes completely blank slates, with only a very sparse background and personality, so that the player has a lot of leeway to decide who they are. This leaves these characters somewhat flat at times. There's a reason that two of the most well-regarded Western RPGs of all time focus on a character who is a particular person with a concrete history, and how they move on from it. Baldur's Gate 3 takes a different approach. It does do the blank slate protagonist thing, but presents you with a cavalcade of wonderful characters, and also Gale, who are sort of collectively the protagonist of the game, with Tav as the Watson to their Holmes. There's one character that stands above the rest, though, and will become the protagonist of the whole game if you let her. That's my darling wife, Lae'zel. She's not the game's most popular character, since she's initially so standoffish, maybe also a bit weirder looking if you're a fucking coward, but she is without a doubt my favorite, and I want to use this video to give her her flowers in my own special way. She certainly has her own special way, and it's being mean. The way I see it, if you let Lae'zel take charge and she becomes the protagonist of your game, it does become the same kind of RPG as Disco Elysium and Knights of the Old Republic 2. It's about a seriously flawed person hitting rock bottom and learning from the experience. The line between Harry Dubois and Lae'zel of Kalir is shorter than you might think. All of my videos are love letters, but this one especially is. Every time I've played through Baldur's Gate 3, I've made more or less the same story choices because I enjoy the Lae'zel storyline so much. Baldur's Gate 3 is a whole library of stories, and essentially what I've done is walk into the said library, pick out the first book that caught my eye, and then read and reread it until it fell apart. I hope by the end of this video you'll understand why. Lae'zel's story, in addition to just being a lot of fun for a person like me, is also a great teaching tool for the heroine's journey. In my marathon video, we talked about the carrier bag theory of fiction proposed by Ursula K. Le Guin. The heroine's journey is another alternative to that hack fraud con artist Joseph Campbell and his dumbass sexist monomyth. I've already described at least a couple other myths on this channel, dickhead. I should clarify that this analysis is based on Victoria Lynn Schmidt's version of the heroine's journey. The heroine's journey is a more grounded, less mythological story cycle. It focuses on recovery and community after the world falls out from under the heroine. Lae'zel, you see, is secretly the game's real heroine. Fucking fight me on this. She's the only member of the party that appears in the opening pre-rendered cutscene, and she's the first party member the player meets if they don't choose to play her on the character selection menu. Her quest is tied much more intimately into the main quest than any other character. Shadowheart comes in second in that regard, to the point where I wouldn't feel comfortable dropping either of them from the active party. It helps that the Lae'zel Shadowheart dynamic is one of the most fun in the game. In this playthrough, as in all my playthroughs so far, I'm using Femtav, Lae'zel, Shadowheart, and Karlach. Girl Strip, Lae'zel has quite the introduction.
Abomination. This is your end.
Now, if you're a pathetic lesbian like I am, you might have been hooked at this moment. The first time I played this game, I was streaming my run through the prologue on Discord to some of my friends, and upon meeting her, I said to them, "My goal is now to romance her. Everything else is commentary." I was feeling like that one Gianni Matrigrano video with Spike Spiegel. You know the one. It was a pretty bold move of Larian to hide the best storyline in the game behind a character that you might not like if your tastes are way different than mine. I really do applaud them for making Lae'zel a fairly unsympathetic character at the start, to make her journey all the more meaningful. The one downside is that her initial prickliness means that a lot of people missed out on how special her story is. Chapter 1. Illusion of the Perfect World. Lae'zel starts off as, frankly, a total bitch. She's convinced at the start of the game that the Githyanki are superior to all the peoples of the Prime Material Plane. In her view, they have everything to learn from her, and she has nothing to learn from them. She constantly berates everyone from the Prime Material Plane for not measuring up to her warped standards of Githyanki morality. I respect this game a lot for not having all of your companions automatically respect you just because you're the player character, with Lae'zel being the primary example. If you let Lae'zel down from the cage and trust what she says, she sets the agenda. The party will cure their illithid tadpole infection at a Githyanki crash.
I understand much beyond your comprehension. More to the point, I know the cure for our condition. It is imperative we locate a creche. You do well to observe more and question less.
Ich glaube, dass ich Covid habe. Lae'zel's initial superiority complex and bitchiness is what puts a lot of people off from being interested in her character. I have one friend who was so tired of her attitude that they left her in her hanging cage in Act 1 and never recruited her. I, on the other hand, was deep in my I can fix her feelings, even at this early stage. Naturally, I went along with whatever she said at this point, and did everything I could that I thought would impress her. The way you get her to like you is a little bit counterintuitive. This game's system for making your companions like you is a bit more nuanced than some other games I've played. You can't win Lae'zel over by being nice to her, since the society she grew up in would view that as a sign of weakness. Instead, you have to win her over by acting with authority, by using violence as a solution to problems, and by going along with what she says and not challenging her account of Githyanki culture. Lae'zel is not a good person at the start of the game, and if you play Tab as a goody little two-shoes, she won't really respect you because you're the kind of person she and the Githyanki consider to be weak. The only thing the Githyanki, including Lae'zel, value is strength. Lae'zel is a complete ideologue for her queen at the start. At this point in the game, Lae'zel will only say nice things about characters who demonstrate bravery and ferocity in combat.
Isn't it glorious? Karlach's fury is a wonder to behold.
It's a very black and white worldview, or in Lae'zel's words,
Blackith requires everything of her children. I can't count how many bruises I've inflicted. Can't measure how much blood I've drawn in the undying queen's name. I know only blood red and death black. My mind is silver, and my body steel. I am what I must be, say what I must be, to survive every beast I face and every wound I bear.
Early on, the party comes across some Githyanki that are searching for a stolen Githyanki weapon. Among them is Kithrak Voss, one of the Githyanki Dragon Knights. When Lae'zel attempts to address him, it becomes clear that she's a small fry among her own people, and the Githyanki treat their own kind of a lower station only slightly better than they treat outsiders. Theirs is not an egalitarian society. For now, though, it's best if the other Gith don't know about the weapon. If you have sufficiently earned Lae'zel's respect, she initiates an encounter with you.
Isn't it obvious? I want to taste you. Perhaps tonight, perhaps later. but I want it all the same. Do you?
Ma'am, please, you have to crush me. Later on, she will in fact have sex with Tav, but claims that it doesn't mean anything emotionally. She essentially uses Tav like a toy, since she still hasn't unlearned her Githyanki superiority complex. When asked about the possibility of sleeping together again, she has this to say.
I'll consider it if I am in need of relief. Until then, I'll enjoy watching you squirm from the anticipation of it.
I think I need a cold shower. Lae'zel still thinks she's too superior to you to consider Tav an equal partner, which is why she relegates her to plaything. Throughout Act 1, the party searches for cures to their illithid tadpole infection, but discovers them all to be ineffective since the tadpoles are modified by magic. Therefore, they go along with Lae'zel's idea to locate a Githyanki crash. On the path to the crash, you encounter a woman who tries to hire you to steal a Githyanki egg. I think this scene is important for a couple of reasons. For one, it introduces the idea that the Gith might have more diverse worldviews than the one Lae'zel's been espousing all game. For another, the idea of being a third party to a debate on my personhood between two different outside groups is frustratingly familiar. Naturally, I chose to murder the shit out of her. Notably, if you play a Gith PC and engage this NPC in combat, she says, "I knew I was right about you beasts." This game lets you murder a scientific racist, and I think that's beautiful. This scene also introduces one of my quibbles with Baldur's Gate 3. The problem is that fantasy fiction often features a lot of different fantasy races, some of whom have been historically coded as inherently sinister. It should be pretty obvious why this is an issue, since it more or less creates a world where racists who say that certain things being in orcs or goblins' nature are completely correct. This has always been a serious issue in Dungeons & Dragons, due to the alignment system, since the rulebooks used to dictate what alignment sentient beings had a capacity to have. D&D reckoned with this issue to some extent, though arguably inadequately, by ending the practice of inherent species alignment, and by removing the negative modifiers that some ostensibly monstrous races got to their intelligence. Baldur's Gate 3 stumbles with this slightly, since Lae'zel's story is largely about proving the Githyanki have the capacity to be better than the worst stereotypes about them. Githyanki have historically been one of those so-called monstrous races, after all. However, while this game treats the Githyanki well in that regard, it does not do so much for the other historically maligned types of creatures. I'm pretty sure there's no goblin in this entire game that doesn't live up to the worst stereotypes of their kind. In the spirit of fairness, I will say that this game began development before D&D revised their policy on this, but it is really frustrating regardless. Lae'zel is a pretty static character for most of Act 1, until you reach the Githyanki crash. For most of this section, we are still in the first phase of the heroine's journey, the illusion of the perfect world. In this stage, the heroine thinks everything is okay. Her world still seems to make sense to her. Lae'zel is quite sure in Act 1 about how the world works. Even by Githyanki standards, her faith in Vlaakith, the undead god queen of the Githyanki, is unshakable. However, the winds of change are starting to blow, and they turn into a whirlwind when the party reaches the Githyanki crash. Chapter 2: Betrayal and Disillusionment. The second stage of the heroine's journey is betrayal and disillusionment. The heroine finds that her understanding of the world is flawed and can't be relied on anymore, and this is going to happen several times in quick succession for poor Lae'zel in the Githyanki crash. Upon arriving, the party sees the kind of hospitality they can expect from the Githyanki. We can see the way that the Githyanki indoctrinate their youth into their fascist ideology. They simply cull the ones who don't pass muster. Inside the crash, the party observes a painting of Vlaakith, but Lae'zel notices that it's been defaced with a drawing of a comet. Put this in the back of your mind for later, along with the name Orpheus. You can also go visit the room where the Githyanki keep their eggs. Lae'zel explains that the Gith reproduce asexually, and the process is directed by Vlaakith herself. This is another insidious element of Vlaakith's control over the Githyanki. They don't have families, per se, and therefore no one to be loyal to but Vlaakith herself. Everything goes back to the Queen. It's the same reason the Githyanki are trained to only see blood red and death black. Allowing their passions to go anywhere else would cause their loyalty to waver. Vlaakith's society is deeply sinister, and Lae'zel is about to get a bitter taste of that fact. Lae'zel and her companions go to the Zaithisk, the device that Lae'zel insists will cure them of their illithid infection. However, things take a turn for the worse. Through the psychic link provided by the illithid tadpoles, Tav is able to determine that the Zaithisk isn't actually curing Lae'zel's infection, it's just killing her. The rest of the Githyanki use very evasive language when talking about what the Zaithisk actually does. More than anything, it's a tool of euthanasia. This isn't enough quite yet for Lae'zel to see the truth. She convinces herself that instead the doctor has sabotaged the Zaithisk. She tries to find an easier answer first. Soon, though, that will prove impossible. The Inquisitor Wawargaz knows the party has the Astral Prism, an artifact that Shadowheart stole from the Githyanki, and the weapon that Kithrak Voss has been searching for. Vlaakith appears to the party and tells Lae'zel that the person inside the prism, the Dream Visitor, is a corruptive influence. She sends the party into the prism and promises Lae'zel ascension if she kills the Dream Visitor. Inside the prism, Tav finds the Dream Visitor quite impossible to kill, and upon exiting the prism, Wawargaz and his retinue attack. After being forced to kill her former comrades in self-defense, Lae'zel finally lets her mask slip. There's one line here that I particularly want to make note of. Lae'zel says,
I followed your path. What good? This heart of stone, for it to be shattered.
Earlier in the game, Lae'zel claimed to only know Blood Red and Death Black. We know now that that's not true. She wasn't heartless, she was just hardening her heart. And the betrayal of Vlaakith and the lie at the center of her native culture is breaking her heart. Sensing her own vulnerability, she tries to hide it and make sense of what she's seen again. When one is bought into the ideology as much as Lae'zel has, it's difficult to shake one's faith. This is the second phase of the heroine's journey, betrayal and disillusionment. Lae'zel's worldview is crumbling in the face of Vlaakith's betrayal. She's unsure of what to do now since she'd defined her entire life up to now by serving her queen, who now sees her as a traitor. I'll admit that I initially only followed Lae'zel's questline in my first playthrough because I was insanely horny for her, like Tex Avery Wolf levels of horny. It was around this point in the questline that I realized that it was actually really interesting and special. It's also where it became resonant. In case you can't tell by my gorgeous voice, I'm an American. I am embarrassed to admit that I believed in the system in America for a long time. I wasn't a right-winger, but I was absolutely a lib for a lot of my life. If you can believe it, from the ages of birth to 25, I was a complete goody little two-shoes, and I used to be a history teacher in the before times. It doesn't get much more believer in the system than being a public school teacher. What made me lose faith in that system was basically everything that happened in the year 2020. First of all, the response a lot of people had to the pandemic in America was pathetic. I really do think that we could have nipped COVID in the bud if Donald Trump hadn't started conspiracy theories about it that were immediately sycophantically believed by all of his followers. Secondly, COVID laid bare a lot of the problems with the American school system. Despite the difficulties the students were facing in adjusting to schooling in the distanced environment, I still had to give them 2 grades every single week. I was literally required to give them work to do so that they could have grades, even though extracurriculars weren't really happening, and that's the reason they give for requiring grades under normal circumstances. I could tell that what my students really needed, more than any history lesson I could teach them, was a break, and that was the one thing I couldn't give them. It was difficult to have to keep putting more and more work on my students, despite the fact that I could tell they were suffering. I didn't want to adopt a me versus my students mentality. The excuse that's often given for why high schoolers are given so much work to do is that it prepares them for the workplace. I can only speak for myself, but if I ever got a job where they treated me like a high schooler, I'd quit so goddamn fast I'd set a new land speed record. I came to realize that a lot of American education is really designed to make people pliable and obedient, workers who won't question their bosses. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to help them be critical thinkers and individuals, and that simply couldn't be done within the requirements that were set in front of me. The cognitive dissonance from this, plus what I now recognize as gender dysphoria, plus the isolation of the pandemic, made me lose faith in the institutions that I trusted when I was young. For a while I wallowed in unproductive nihilism and hopelessness. Things didn't start to improve until I moved to a new country and transed my goddamn gender. I absolutely related to feeling betrayed and having my worldview shattered by an extraordinary circumstance. How's that for betrayal and disillusionment? Chapter 3, The Awakening. Lae'zel leaves the crash directionless and unsure what to do. The party's been directed to investigate the cult of the Absolute at Moonrise Towers, so Lae'zel comes along. The night before Lae'zel and her companions enter the Shadow Curse lands around the tower, an unlikely visitor comes to the camp.
Skakek Kier Gith Shabeleth. My blade rests. Mother Gith compels you to listen.
Speak. My ear is yours.
I know you carry the astral prism, Lae'zel. Within it lies the seed of Vlaakith's demise, and I intend to help you bring it to fruition.
It turns out the Githyanki aren't all so devoted to their queen. Voss tells Lae'zel that a lot of what she knows is a lie. The Zaithis isn't a healing machine. It's a device to harness the memories and essence of infected Githyanki. Then it euthanizes them. Vlaakith also promised Lae'zel ascension.
Ascension is a young Githyanki's greatest honor. Long ago, the Geich enslaved my people. They dominated our minds and bred us for war, until Great Mother Gith took a hammer to our bonds. From the day of our hatching, young Gith have one purpose: to train hard enough to slay a Geich and take its head. Then, we speak the rite of ascension, and a red dragon comes to fly us to Vlaakith in Tunarath, City of Death. We are honored with an eternal home in the astral, celebrated for our victory. We are ascended. Or so I believed.
Voss explains that this, too, is a lie.
Lies, Lae'zel, every last one. There is no purification, no ascension. The Zaith Isk does not purify, it extracts memory and kills the infected. Nor does the Lich Queen glorify the ascended. She feeds on most all of them to grow her power and pursue godhood.
Just when Lae'zel is at her lowest point, she gets a new direction. This is the third stage in the heroine's journey, the awakening. Lae'zel felt hopeless and denied reality. Now she has something new to believe in, but she's still not so sure. When I was a teenager, I was convinced that if I did everything right, then in the end I would be happy. I did pretty well in high school and extremely well in college. Convinced that if I just got a big adult job, I'd feel internally complete. Naturally, when I encountered what I described in the previous section, that didn't wind up happening. I still felt like a confused child, even though I was in my mid-20s. The feeling remained even after I left that job behind. For me, the awakening was very literal. It was when I got off the Campbell shit and realized that I am in fact on the heroine's journey. This doesn't map exactly to gender, but it's certainly a major factor. I am a heroine. You are too, maybe. I still doubted myself and stumbled, but I had renewed drive to exist. I promise, the video I release in November will have nothing to do with gender. Voss tells Lae'zel to meet in Baldur's Gate to discuss further what he told her. Lae'zel is unsure of whether to believe the old knight, but resolves that she has to meet him again and find out for sure either way. Alright, let's have a little intermission, shall we? This one's a bit longer, so we'll have 2 intermissions in this video. And I actually made notes on what I'm going to talk about in my intermissions, so they'll be a little bit more organized than my previous ones were. So, first of all, I want to talk a little bit about... I love Baldur's Gate 3, but I want to talk a little bit about some of the issues that I have with it. And the first is that this game is a little bit fatphobic, in my opinion. Because, like, there's no option... Like, basically, you can only play, like, a rail-thin person or, like a huge muscle mommy, and there's, like, no option to play someone who's big but not, like, really muscular. And, like, the only characters in this game that are fat are ones whose, like, their whole personality is that they're, like, disgusting and gluttonous. Like the ogres and that one Thorm guy in the tavern in Act 2. I just think that's a little weird and gross, and I think when this game gets so much other stuff right about, like, you know, having a lot of different, like, genders and representation and people of different races on screen, I think it would be nice if they could also extend that to different body types as well. Another thing that it's kind of frustrating to me about this game is the fact that some of the events are, like, really finicky and weird to get to trigger. Like, in my playthrough of this game, I wanted to do the whole, like, quest with Lorroakan and Aelin in Act 3,
but because I didn't talk to Aelin and Isabel, like, immediately after beating Ketheric, they just kind of fucked off from my camp and never appeared again, so I couldn't actually finish the quest. Like my journal said, like, oh, go talk to Aelin and tell her about Leroican, but she just wasn't in my camp anymore, so I was just like, alright, guess I'll just kill Leroican anyway. Strange. But, like, that obviously pales in comparison to the fucking recruitment conditions for Minthara if you don't side with the goblins. Like, it's straight up some, like, Simon's Quest La Milana bullshit where, like, you have to, like, knock her out and then kill the other two, but it has to be a full moon, and you have to be a Pisces, and you have to roll a nat 20. I do not like, I've tried to recruit Minthara basically every time after my first playthrough, and I have not gotten it to work yet. So that's a little bit embarrassing, but, you know, it's whatever. And I guess my third kind of beef with Baldur's Gate 3 is, well, one of them is that, like, it doesn't really account for characters being alive. So, like, you know, sometimes you'll run into a situation in this game where, like, there's, like, a scripted encounter, right, as part of a quest or something. And you're like, well, I don't think these people deserve to die for what's happening here, so I'll turn on non-lethal damage. But the game does not account for you knocking characters out in, like, forced combats. I was actually playing a little bit of Tactician, Act 1, after I recorded all the footage just for fun. And, like, there's the part where, like, Nettie's being, not Nettie, the old hag lady is being, like, harassed by two guys, and, like, I turned on non-lethal damage and knocked them out. And she was like, what the fuck, you killed them? And I was like, no, I didn't. It's mouse them over. It says they have 1 hit point right there. But this game does not really account for that, which I know some people have, like, done challenges where they're like, oh, I want to play a character who's like a monk who doesn't kill, and then, like, the game just does not account for you not killing. Which, it's a Dungeons & Dragons game. Dungeons & Dragons is primarily a game about killing, but still, you know. If you're gonna give the non-lethal damage toggle, like, let it have some effect on the gameplay. And also, I don't really like Act 3 as much as the other 2 acts. It just feels a little bit less focused, and also the city map. I've beaten this game... I've almost beat this game 3 times. I've beaten it twice, and I still cannot navigate Baldur's Gate to save my life. This game isn't perfect, but the Lae'zel story is the thing about it. Love this game. I'm not. None of these are, like, big enough nitpicks that I don't think you should play this game. I think it's a beautiful game that everyone should try if they care about the medium, and have the equipment to run it, of course. And lastly, for this intermission, like last time, I want to do some media recommendations. So, it is now, as of my recording of this, it is September 21st. It is the day before the autumnal equinox, so I will recommend you some autumnal media. So, my game recommendation for today is Pathologic Classic HD. It is actually a very autumnal game, in my opinion, because, like, you know, the grass is brown, and, like, there's always, like, leaves falling from the trees. There's not many. So it looks like fall, and, like, you know, the characters are all dressed in very, like, fall outfits. And also, you know, it's kind of spooky. It's got fall vibes for sure. It's got, like, fall vibes brackets evil. Which is the kind of vibe that I go for in my day-to-day. And also, like, here's the thing. I know H-Bomber Guy said to just play Pathologic 2 instead, but he's wrong. Pathologic 1 is not that hard. Like, he's like, oh, the combat's impossible, don't even bother. Like, literally, if you just, like, go play Blood, and if you can pitchfork a zombie to death in Blood, then you can do literally anything the combat in Pathologic throws at you, and I'm not joking. And my movie recommendation for today is Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost. I am not a Scooby-Doo fan, but I am a Hex Girls fan. That's the important thing here. That's the reason to live, is the Hex Girls. That's what it's all about, baby. Anyway, back to the video.
Lae'zel's story takes a backseat during Act 2 in favor of characters like Shadowheart, Astarion, and Minthara if she didn't bite it in Act 1. Also Halsin, which is honestly one of the chief arguments against my assertion that Lae'zel is the true main character of Baldur's Gate 3. However, it does parallel nicely with the next stage of the heroine's journey. Chapter 4, The Descent. As Lae'zel struggles with doubt on her personal journey, she and her compatriots enter the dreariest part of their physical journey. The Shadow-Cursed lands are an ideal backdrop for self-doubt and grief for a former life. We will come back to that theme. Like I said, Lae'zel doesn't get quite as much in this act, but I'll let it slide since the end of Act 1 and the beginning of Act 3 are super critical to her storyline. The character who gets the most attention in Act 2 is Shadowheart, Lae'zel's worst friend. Her arc in Act 2 centers around her descending into the Gauntlet of Shar and coming to the realization that she's also in a cult that lied to her whole life, and being devastated by that revelation. For the first time in the game, Lae'zel actually expresses sympathy for her traveling companion.
Shadowheart suffers. You might be surprised, but it pains me to see.
There's not much dialogue to that effect, but the events in the Gauntlet of Shar and the Shadowfell must give Lae'zel a lot to think about. The Night Song tells Shadowheart about what being a Dark Justiciar will be like, and it must resonate with what Lae'zel is discovering about Vlaakith.
The fate you seal is your own. To be a Dark Justiciar is to turn your heart from everything but loss. You will know no love, no joy, only servitude, until of course your mistress inevitably discards you.
This is a huge theme in Baldur's Gate 3. The villains are all about taking people's will from them and making them tools of grand designs. Lae'zel was trained to be a tool for Vlaakith, just like Shadowheart was for Shar. No, not that one, silly. That one. There you go. I actually adore the Shadowheart-Lae'zel dynamic. They start out the game fucking hating each other. I highly recommend keeping them both in your party all throughout Act 1, purely for the quality of the banter between them. However, it's around this point when they start to soften up on each other, especially since they both must realize that their stories are really similar. They make a pretty compelling enemies to livers storyline in timelines where Tav doesn't exist. There's a reason that half my Tumblr dash, which I never use by the way, is art of Shadowheart and Lae'zel making out sloppy style. Speaking of Tav and making out sloppy style, Lae'zel approaches Tav one night. In her moment of doubt, Lae'zel does what anyone does. She reaches out to her companion for support. She is still in the process of unlearning all of her Githyanki cultural baggage, though, so her relationship with Tav is mediated through Githyanki terms. They're basically battle partners / fuck buddies now, but Lae'zel begins to show a warmer side of herself to Tav, since she's unsure of how to feel at this point about the toxic culture of her youth. It's really heartwarming to see her genuinely smile at you after so long glaring. The descent is apropos for two reasons. The aforementioned Gauntlet of Shar, and for the fact that the shape of the Absolute cult's plan comes into focus. They plan to use an illithid elder brain, along with the magical tadpoles implanted in the true soul, to enslave the world. It comes back around to illithid and Githyanki after all. After clearing out Moonrise, the necessity of getting to Baldur's Gate is more clear than ever. Lots of death cults in this game. The Sharites, the Cult of the Absolute, the Cult of Vlaakith. You can even interpret the illithid grand design in those terms, since most illithids have no will of their own, being controlled by the Elder Brain. They essentially die when they undergo seromorphosis. We have a word for ideologies that involve giving up all love, joy, and free will to die for a charismatic leader, and that word is fascism. Lae'zel's story is essentially about her de-radicalizing and becoming a lesbian instead, and that fucking rules in my opinion. Lae'zel mostly stews on the creche and on her meeting with Voss in this act. We don't get much advancement plot-wise, aside from being attacked by Vlaakith's assassins. However, it's essentially a tone poem episode, when viewed as part of her story. It's an external representation of her doubt and her terror at having her life upended. This touches on a similar feeling to the one I described in the Metroid Fusion video. Awakening to a new world brings positive change, but it's not without fear and doubt. At the end of Act 2, one event occurs which is absolutely critical to Lae'zel's plotline, however. The Dream Visitor calls the party inside the prism once more, revealing itself to be an illithid called the Emperor. The source of the prism's power, and what allowed the Emperor to keep the tadpole's influence out of Lae'zel and her companions' heads, is Prince Orpheus, the son of Mother Gith. He's been shut up inside the prism for goddess knows how long. Lae'zel is shocked to learn this. Orpheus being alive casts even further doubt on Vlaakith and gives credibility to Voss. The problem is, of course, that the Emperor is an illithid, and Lae'zel's hatred of her people's old enemies runs deep despite her doubting of her culture. It means that she's less likely to trust what he tells her. In any case, the reunion with Voss won't come soon enough. The Emperor is also a piece of shit, is the thing. It is nothing but condescending to the party, ever. If you test it after it reveals its nature, it admits that it really just sees you as a pawn in its schemes. It does not trust you to think for yourself, just to be its minions. Going from Vlaakith to the Emperor is just going from the frying pan into another frying pan, so I had Tav be nothing but a jerk to the Emperor all throughout Act 3. We'll come back to this. Chapter 5, The Eye of the Storm. The events at Sharess's Caress in Baldur's Gate, where Voss asked Lae'zel to meet and discuss further, represent the 5th stage in the heroine's journey, the Eye of the Storm. Here, Lae'zel experiences a lot of temporary success. Now that Lae'zel knows Orpheus is alive, Voss knows a way to free him. Conveniently, the party earlier met a devil who owns the exact artifact they need, the Orphic Hammer. Tav decides to cut a deal with the devil for the hammer, meaning they now have a means to free Orpheus. For her help, Voss presents Lae'zel with a Githyanki silver sword. In the eye of the storm, the heroine experiences a lot of temporary success. She thinks that everything makes sense now, and she's achieved a variation of her lifelong dream of being a great warrior of the Githyanki, wielding a silver sword. However, it's temporary because there is one final wrinkle before Lae'zel accepts her new destiny. There are many eyes of the storm in our lives. These are moments where everything seems to be settling down. I hate to admit it, but I feel like I am in a bit of an eye of the storm phase right this moment. However, to truly grow, we need to see the next stage of the heroine's journey. Chapter 6. All is Lost. Death. That night in the camp, Vlaakith appears to Lae'zel once again. Once more, she offers ascension. This is critical. This is Lae'zel's last chance to be the person she always intended. It is now or never. However, Lae'zel has seen enough evidence that Vlaakith is completely full of shit.
I gave you my faith, and you called me traitor. I gave you my life, and you ordered your knights to hunt me. I have witnessed too much, and you have given me too little. Finally, I can see. Orpheus will live, and I will hear his creed. This is my word.
With Tav's help, she rejects the queen. Vlaakith's attitude completely changes.
Your word is nothing! You are nothing! The Kithraki will bring you. I will tear your flesh from your bones and devour your skull's marrow while you beg for death. I will consume you. I will unmake you.
Lae'zel is dead to her. Although really, all the Githyanki are dead to her. Nothing but tools in her grand plan that happen to have voices. Lae'zel now sees Vlaakith for what she is, a lying manipulator who doesn't care about the Illithid grand design or the well-being of the Githyanki people. She only cares about her own attempt to reach godhood. The only thing at the end of the path of serving her is death. I correlate this scene with the 6th phase of the heroine's journey. All is lost / death. Lae'zel dies in the sense that she severs herself from her old self. It's like the death card in tarot. Not a physical death, but a change in worldview and increased self-awareness. I think it's healthy and necessary for people to have these kinds of deaths sometimes. However, there's nothing wrong with grieving for the person you used to be.
Vlaakith has upended Lae'zel's whole existence. Everything she knew to be true, every plan and aspiration she ever held has been painfully ripped away. Lae'zel's bitterness is born of sadness. She is mourning the loss of the person she once was, and can never be again.
Also, Lae'zel has 2 lines in this dialogue that radiate such energy.
I have what I have gathered for myself. I'm moored to a new regent, a new land, and new allies. I am known and honored by you, the source of my bruises. Vlaakith cannot unmake she who no longer exists.
When I heard these lines, I was banging my fists on my desk and yelling the word trans over and over. If you want to see a transition narrative as a heroine's journey, look no further. I mean, there's other examples too, but here's one. Obviously, Lae'zel's old lies are different from mine, but the comparison stands. I also was forced to accept some things. Lae'zel was forced to realize that no matter how much she loved her queen would never love her back. I don't have a queen myself, but I do have a thing I used to idolize. I'm not only an American, but a Texan. There are still a lot of reasons I want to love Texas. I love the food, I love the wide open spaces, I love some of the music. I love my friends and my family. However, it's probably not in my best interest to ever go back to that place that I lived from when I was less than 2 years old until I went out to college. And that hurts a little bit. To borrow a turn of phrase from Abigail Thorne, I might love my country if it loved me back, There are a lot of wonderful people in Texas, but alas, they've been systemically disenfranchised for so long that I'm forced to make this calculation. In short, Lae'zel has decided to mess with her Texas, just like I messed with Texas. Have you messed with your personal Texas? Chapter 7. Support. Now comes my very favorite phase of the heroine's journey. When one suffers a death like Lae'zel has, the one thing needs is understanding friends and companions. Once Lae'zel's fully committed to severing herself from Vlaakith, her relationship with Tav deepens rapidly. I genuinely love the ballad of Tav and Lae'zel so much. Like I said before, Tav and Lae'zel first became interested in each other before either of them grew as people at all. And for Lae'zel to be interested in Tav, she has to be kind of a dick. If you romance Lae'zel as Tav, it becomes the tale of two horrible women inspiring each other to be better than their bad starting points and redeeming each other through their love. Speaking of love,
You showed me the betweens and beyonds. Between war and peace. Beyond passion and obsession. Most importantly, you showed me freedom. There's more, but I don't know how to say it. I don't know what to call it. I just know, whatever comes next, I want you near. When all this is over, will you stay with me? For good? Chaque Vome Findu, source of my joy.
I almost cried when I first saw this scene. Lae'zel's interest in Tav was her gateway out of Githyanki fascism into love, freedom, and joy. No woman is an island, as I've said before, and it's the relationship that allows Lae'zel to go on after having her world shattered so many times in quick succession. Her feelings for Tav are strong enough that she sees beauty in a whole plane of existence, which she once only had disdain for. Support is my favorite phase of the heroine's journey, because it's really what sets it apart from that Campbell nonsense. The hero is all about conquest, individualism, kingship. Meanwhile, the heroine embraces the fact that she can't do it alone, and sees that getting assistance from others is a virtue. Personally, I still often need to be reminded of this. Before I came out, I was toxically, self-destructively self-reliant. It's a habit that I'm still working on ridding myself of completely. I am pleased to say that I'm making a lot of progress. I am literally, as I'm typing this, being aided by a friend who's consensually bullying me into finally finishing a draft of this video script instead of procrastinating. How thematically appropriate that so much of Act 3 is about gathering allies, like Nine Fingers Keen, Counselor Floric, Minsk, and the City Watch for the final confrontation with the Elder Brain. The difficult question remains, what to do about Orpheus and the Emperor? Ultimately, the party decides that freeing the Githyanki prince is worth the risk. The Emperor insists that freeing Orpheus would be a bad idea, but it's already been established that it doesn't see the party as worthy of having a say. It claims to never lie, but it's lying about Orpheus right this second. In response to the party resolving to free Orpheus, the very pragmatic Emperor goes to join the Elder Brain in response. However, without the Emperor, the party will need another Illithid to defeat the Brain. Neither Tav nor Orpheus particularly wants to become an Illithid, so another volunteer emerges. How's that for support? Through this process, Lae'zel has learned real courage, has learned to see beauty outside the narrow dichotomy of the Githyanki ideology, and has learned to enjoy freedom from her companions and from her lover. This is the rebirth, or the moment of truth. Conclusion. Rebirth and the moment of truth. During the battle with the Elder Brain, Lae'zel is applying herself in new ways. She's not fighting for her own glory, or for the glory of an uncaring and distant authority, but for herself, her friends, the plane she's come to love, and for her own freedom. Fighting isn't wrong, but now she has pure motives. It's beautiful to see. In the end, Lae'zel is critical in stopping the Elder Brain and saving Baldur's Gate and the world. The new Lae'zel is born in the fires of this battle. What comes next is a critical decision.
With their lost prince returned, my people will burn away Vlaakith's corruption. And it is all thanks to you. The Illithid who defied a netherbrain.
I thank you, my liberator, my savior. My people are leaving, and I must leave with them. Come, Lae'zel. We will free the Githyanki and dismantle the Empire. Let them be imprisoned no longer.
Mother Gith battled for liberty, but it was only here, with you, that I learned what it meant to be free. Orpheus, I'll remain here. My destiny is for neither you nor Vlaakith to set. It is mine alone.
While going with the prince would be a great honor, Lae'zel wants to stay in the world and with the person that she's fallen in love with. I think it's beautiful that in this version of the ending, Lae'zel, the former glory hound, chooses humility and love over fortune and valor. This doesn't mean she'll never need valor again. It won't be a perfectly easy life for Tav and Lae'zel, but they find enough comfort in each other that they'll manage just fine. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. I like this ending because it's Lae'zel choosing freedom. If she does go off with Orpheus, she's still subordinating herself to a cause, albeit a good one, by choosing love and freedom in the end. It's the culmination of that arc. She goes from no individualism, a cog in a fascist pretender's regime, to wanting to live for herself and be happy. So many people have tried to control her and her friends. Vlaakith, Shar, the Absolute Cult, Zariel, Cazador, Mizora, the Emperor. But love and the desire to flourish is stronger than the will of evil to dominate life. In the end, Lae'zel learns to live with a new understanding and a new relationship with the world, and she will do so with her love, the one who opened her eyes and let her see all the colors of the rainbow for the first time. This story resonated with me so deeply since it's about a fanatical woman who found that the wellspring of her fanaticism was dry. It was the love and support of her community that allowed her to go on during her darkest moments, and to mature into an admirable, lovable person. I hope that all of you can find a community that will help you grow in that direction too. Sure, she could have gone with Orpheus. She could have even been queen. But in her own way, she is queen. Hail to the queen, baby. Thanks for watching.